So trauma is this really big, complicated thing that I'm going to try to distill down to a few important pieces for you. Hopefully that will be helpful. So the first piece to understand is that trauma we think about as like this thing that happens to you and in you, and I'm just going to tease that out for a second. So a traumatic event is something that occurs outside of you. And then trauma is actually the response that you have within you to that traumatic event. A traumatic event might be something like a car accident, and one person experiences it as traumatic. They have that internal reaction, and somebody else doesn't. So the traumatic event is only traumatic if it causes trauma. So then what is trauma? So trauma is simply when our system, kind of our organism, if you will, gets overwhelmed by our experience. So we try to use all of our resources, internal and external, to cope with whatever comes our way. And a trauma happens when all of our resources are just, it can't keep up with what's happening outside of us, and we are overwhelmed. So that's what a trauma is. So if you picture that inside of you lives an imaginary, not real, it's not actually what happens inside of you, filing cabinet. And that filing cabinet has been growing your whole life, and in all the drawers are your memories. And if we have a memory that's a normal event, so we were swinging on a swing, we were eating a certain meal, those things get filed as you would, boring bits of information. When we experience something as traumatic, it's almost like there's been a fire alarm, and our administrative assistant who does all that nice filing leaves the building, and that piece of paper just gets tossed into the filing room, and maybe it gets set on top of one of the cabinets or below on the floor. And you can imagine that just feels different in our system. And so if the door were to open and a huge breeze were to come, anything that's not filed away properly might just get kind of swirled around and churned up, and maybe it makes it hard to see. And if you have one thing like that, it might feel like, whoo, that was kind of a lot, and I kind of lost my way for a second. But if you have a lot of papers scattered about your room, it's going to make it really hard to cope. So the more trauma we have, the more likely we are to experience things as traumatic, because our file room is kind of a mess. So now, if you will, I'm going to imagine with you what would happen if you had childhood trauma. So during our childhood, that file room is getting built up. We have like administrators and all these people in there kind of building these filing cabinets. And if there are papers being tossed in there as the filing cabinets are being built, the filing cabinets themselves get kind of wonky. Things are at an angle, things are missing drawers, etc. And the trauma kind of becomes more about who we are and like how we move through the world than just about that trauma. So the way that we remember all things can be skewed. The way that we think about things can be skewed. When we go in that filing room to like check on something, it's like, whoa, there's a lot of chaos in here. And so just to summarize, so trauma is something that happens, that's a traumatic event. Our reaction is when we've been overwhelmed by that event, all of our resources are drained, and then we experience trauma. You can have two people have the same event, one person has trauma, one doesn't. And as we grow, if those traumas don't ever get filed away, they kind of just cause chaos for us whenever we go back to visit our memories. And so one of the things that therapy can be really helpful with is teaching us how to file away those memories in a way that makes them feel like all the other memories that we have.